I'm sitting here at Kiama next to the beach in the grounds where they're going to have the market this afternoon with a very special guest who I've only met a couple of years ago, Michael Simic.
Yeah.
How you going?
I'm good. It's nice to be here in the gazebo with you, Peter.
Oh, it's actually, this is a beautiful spot, isn't it? Kiama is just one of those seaside towns in New South Wales, and I think it's just so picturesque. It's the ocean, the beaches, the people, and a farmer's market coming on this afternoon, which is 3 o'clock, so we'll be finished by then.
Yeah. Well, I spent a lot of years when I was younger living by the sea, so this is very, I always feel very comfortable with the sea breeze and the rustle. These days I like living inland and I like being near the rivers. You know, I don't miss the sea, but I feel very at home when I come here, particularly this part of the coast, which I know very well. So yeah.
No, it's gorgeous. And it's great that we're going to be doing a bit of a musical journey today, a little bit different to the normal podcasts I've been doing via Zoom. It's great, firstly, to be able to sit face to face with someone and have a chat. But also, we met on a journey. You were going to Denmark, I was going to the UK for a bird exhibition. You were going for a bit of a cabaret performance.
That's right, yeah. There was this lovely town in, I'm trying to remember the name of the damn town, in Denmark, and they had a Spiegel tent there where they were running this show called La Soirée, which I've dipped in and out of over the years. I'm one of these kind of chameleon artists who works in a lot of different fields, but for me, it's all about music and connection, you know? So I'm like not a rock guy or a blues guy or a jazz guy or whatever. I'm like, you know, I'm a songwriter and a performer. And there's different avenues where that works. But, you know, when you're in this kind of deluxe kind of old, you know, circus tent with, you know, have you been into a Spiegel tent?
No, I haven't.
So, you know, the German word Spiegel means mirror. So they're these, from the outside it just looks like a wooden tent with a big top. It looks kind of pretty, but you have no idea what it's going to be like till you walk in. Every now and then it comes out the front of IPAC here in Wollongong. So next time it does, I'll tell you so you can check out a show. But when you walk in, all I can say, it's a bit like walking into, if you got shrunk and you're walking into an antique music box or something. It feels like that because it's made of all wood and mirrors and has beautiful brass poles, a bit like an old merry-go-round, and there's a bar and the whole thing. It's like a TARDIS. From the outside, it just looks like, oh yeah, that's a nice little tent. And the inside, you're like in this portal to where you feel like you're in Belle Epoque, Paris or something.
Wow.
It's stunning, and the lead-light windows, all these booths around the edge with, you know, mirrored panels and beautiful old worked wood and carvings, and then a big wooden dance floor that will either be for dancing or be with seats for a more cabaret or concert setting.
Yep.
But anyway, I was there for a month. I'll think of the name of the town shortly, but it's the town that Jorn Utzon lived the rest of his life in after leaving Australia when he more or less was forced off the Opera House.
Yep.
So yeah, so there's a museum for him there. It's a town that is, I didn't know till I got there, has been called the happiest city in Europe because it's something they've just looked at, you know, whatever tests you do to find out those weird things, that just the people are happy there, you know, and I put it down to, it's not a metropolis, it's just a nice sized city that has all the things people need without getting to that point of alienation. It's got a beautiful river running through it. Everyone there seemed, I mean, I'm sure there's some unhappy people there too. Well, but, you know, I certainly had a month there that was great, you know, and when you're performing in a show every night with a bunch of great performers, and I was a singer in the show, and everyone else was like really like incredible circus performers, and, you know, one guy was a French magician and clown, and performers from all around the world, and I become the sort of through line with some songs, a bit like the way the songs are the through line for this interview, and it's a fun way to perform as a musician because the theatrical stakes are much higher when you're performing a song, and acts either side of you are someone who's got this 7-minute incredible acrobatic act that is their life. They make all their living out of this act that has been so well put together. It is stunning to anyone, anywhere in the world, no matter whether you speak the language or not. And so to make your song have to stand up next to that, I like the challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're really happy for me to do my original music in there too. A lot of artists who do that cabaret circuit are more likely to do really great versions of songs that people already know, which I have no problem with. That's beautiful. But the fact that the promoters are up for me doing my thing within it gives me respect for them and is why I say yes, I guess.
Yeah,
you know? Yeah. Anyway, that was a long answer to why I was going to Denmark.
Yeah, and actually I remember, because we were sitting like on the plane ready to take off in Sydney, and I had, like they bumped me up to the exit row seat, and I got 2 vacant seats next to me, and I'm thinking, well, I'm going to be able to snooze all the way.
And here I come.
And you wander up the corridor trying to find a place to put your piano accordion, I think.
That's right.
And you sat there, but there was still a space between us. It was awesome.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful trip over.
Well, it's actually great, isn't it, when you find someone like ourselves, we don't know each other, but we're up for a yarn and we do interesting things we're happy to talk about.
Yep.
And we're not only interested in the thing we do, you know, so it's like, well, 7 or 8 hours or more goes quicker, yeah, right?
Exactly, that's right.
So thanks for that.
Yeah, it was a beautiful experience to meet someone so passionate about your art and interested in my books. I think I was working on a book on the time, so yeah.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about it on the way here today, you being a bird man, and for many years, because I actually went to Wollongong Uni years ago and studied visual arts there, and at the Creative Arts, so I was there from like 88 to 91, and I was doing creative writing, painting, and I was doing lots of music, but at that time they only had classical in the music sphere, and I love classical music, but that's not my journey as a musician, and so I wasn't interested in enrolling in that. They wouldn't have had me anyway, and so I was in creative fields where I could have more personal expression, I suppose, but then, of course, like anyone at uni, spending heaps of time doing other things than your curricula. So I was in crazy bands and performing all the time, and so my school of performance was actually self-taught and learning from working with others, and from seeing other people on stage, So yeah, but I worked with, and I still do, with ink quite a lot, and for years, it's almost been my signature has been this little black bird, and I've kind of forgotten that because for years, even all my set lists, I write them just in ink and brush. It's just even if I'm not painting, it just keeps me connected to the art of the flow of not using a pen or a texter, I thought I've always, while you will know a lot scientifically about birds, I know very little, but I feel a very deep connection with them all the same.
Yeah. And I think we all do. They're probably the most visible of our animal companions that we've got here on Earth, and I think a lot of people have a connection to birds. They're brightly coloured, they're showy, they're noisy.
And they're so different to us, yet somehow there's some communication where there's a bit of interest.
Yep.
I like the fact that wild birds can spend time quite near to us, and that's a lovely thing about your garden. I like the fact that they don't want me to get too close, but they do want to be in the same space. They can be getting stuff out of my backyard, and so can I,
Yeah, exactly. Beautiful. Well, we might listen to your first song, Michael.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned that I went to Wollongong Uni. So when I first came here, one of my favourite albums at the time, when I was about 17, my last year in Canberra, in my last year of school, because I grew up in Canberra, which was a wonderful place to grow up, and I could talk a whole podcast about that. But very quickly, Croatian dad, who was a refugee from communist Yugoslavia, who then spent time in an Italian refugee camp before coming out here. He'd had a really hard life in Yugoslavia and lost his parents very young, and came out here quite battered and bruised emotionally, and then into the kind of hot pot of Australia in the 1960s, which wasn't an easy place for someone who didn't speak English.
Yeah.
But anyway, Dad, incredibly passionate but quite traumatised guy, and a very loving dad, but with a lot of anger and manic and depressive issues. So that was made our childhood always vibrant, put it that way. And what I love about it is he was prepared to cry in front of us and hold us and laugh with us, like all the beautiful things were there. So all the trauma was as big as that. So we really got it. We got cinema scope all of it, which I'm thankful for. Didn't mean it was always easy at the time, but and then my mum, who was a migrant but English, and really was, I'd say, the power centre of the family. Not that she was just holding it together, even though she was, but she's an academic, psychologist, writer, and has always been, and she instilled in me and my elder brother and younger sister that creativity is the most important thing in life, really. Being kind and loving life is great, but the creativity as a sort of, as a personal kind of, a way to understand yourself and a way to understand the world around you. Yep. She didn't really even explain it in that much. She said creativity is important, you can do it as much as you want, I back you in that. And it was this fundamental thought that when I was drawing for hours, or when I was writing a story, or when I started playing music more and enjoying it as a songwriter in my teens, rather than just being in school band and not really digging it, that I've always felt that creativity was this fundamental thing that was part of me, and I'm so thankful to my mum for that. And Dad certainly was in agreement with that. He didn't necessarily state it as much to us, but he certainly loves all the arts and wasn't in the way of that, you know,
Right,
which was great. So I guess that brings me to this first song where if you've got a little bit of a picture of a really loving, beautiful, creative household, but one that also has tempests that go through it that are pretty intense. There's no surprise where, as a young man, when I found Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, I really enjoyed them because there's a genuine melodrama in Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. It's not, I don't think it's put on. It is the fact that life is full of drama and full of beauty and full of poetry and full of sadness and all those things that I was just talking about. And for me, when I first heard this, I read a review of this album. It's called Your Funeral, My Trial. And it was an album that came out in the mid-'80s. So I bought it new on vinyl at the time because vinyl was the thing, vinyl or cassette. And I remember dubbing this onto a cassette because it was a double EP, so it meant it was 2 records, 4 sides, 2 songs a side, which quite labour intensive, but did work thematically. But in the end, I did the classic thing, and it fitted onto one side of a C90, 45 minutes. And I remember coming to Wollongong and living above. There was a student accommodation place that opened up above the Piccadilly Centre, and it had been an old motel. Apparently, the owner had left in a real hurry. It had been like she'd been dealing from there. It had been this heavy place. Someone had been axe murdered in the car park. The cops got onto them. I basically arrived and got dropped off there by my mum, who then left, went back to Canberra. And then it was like, well, now I live in Wollongong. Yeah. And they gave me the key and let me in and then went. They were people who just started running the place. We will get to the song. And so I'm just in this weird kind of almost haunted old motel on my own. That's my experience of moving to Wollongong. I'm like, I couldn't have wanted more, really, but, going through all this stuff, it was creepy, but then finding, I don't know, things that had just been left in a hurry, clothes, like piles of porn magazines, which as an 18-year-old was a bonus, all sorts of stuff. But then I was in this little room at the end, and then where I could look up Crown Street and towards, I guess, in the direction away from Sydney, away from the beach. So in that direction. Yep. And often at night I'd put on this album, and this was the first song on the album, and I'd usually fall asleep during this song, but then the album would play out, and that album is beautiful, but it really is his first Murder Ballads album. It's going into the psychosis of a man trying to deal with his own shadow and not coping with that, and it feels like there's a narrative that's not ever explicit but implicit, where by the end he's killed his wife and he's holding her and going, what have I done? That he's in despair. And this is interesting me at 18. It's quite a peaceful, loving, kind young man that I kind of tried to get on with everyone. I was a middle child, so I guess, with all the fire and brimstone in the family, tried to just not create that, but I was drawn to this stuff because it seemed to make sense to me. But this first song, I'd say, was almost really one of Nick Cave's first genuine love songs he wrote, and it really is this beautiful moment of he and his lover by the river, and it's full of beauty and melancholy, really. And so it's almost like a moment where she's still alive, but is he going back there to the river and being haunted by the memory of her? I don't know, And even though I'd prefer if there didn't have to be songs about these sorts of things, in a world where we live, where a lot of men are still struggling to control or understand themselves, and that comes out, their emotional life comes out in violence, I think songs like this still have a role to play, and so do albums like this.
Wow.
And that's that.
Beautiful.
Quite epic.
And you can really hear that torment in his like in the lyrics and in his voice, on either regret or wonder what he's done. Yeah,
well, I guess that's why I gave some context, seeing we're not listening to the whole album. And you could listen to that song and not know that that's the subject, but that there's some yearning and sadness in there, And I think whether it's something as brutal as what plays out on this album, or whether it's just us in our daily lives, like, loss is part of it, right? And our ability to either accept and bring that into part of our lives, or not accept it and make it become a cancer or whatever, is a big part of our life journey. And I feel that music and certain songs have really helped me understand those parts of myself that even though there is words, so there's obviously the mind is going. When I have my eyes shut, then I feel like my body and my mind and my spirit are all kind of at one, engaging. I feel like I'm in that place. I feel like I can feel my feet in the water, and I love the way songs that are special to you can also gather meaning over the years. So, well, I can remember myself in that little room at the top of this dodgy little, old motel student accommodation place in Wollongong at 18. I can also imagine myself down by that little river and see her planting the willow vines, to the degree that now I'm a dad with a 2-year-old daughter, and we go to the river all the time. I live near Braidwood. I can imagine that being my daughter, and it overlays the trauma with a new story that's actually a beautiful story. And I think that's interesting, that we have all these pathways within us, and we can, and I'm guilty of this as anyone, keep running those same pathways of trauma. We can, I'll say I rather than we, I can accept those things in my life and go, that is part of me, it's real, and I'm not pretending it's not. I'm not saying it's all over and I'm moving on. I'm just going, it's part of me, but I choose to be a happy, functioning, loving man within that, and that's part. And I almost feel like becoming a dad, particularly at 49, and I'm 51 now, is such this lovely. At any age, it's an invitation to transformation, obviously. But when I've spent half my life doing other stuff, I'll say half confidently that longevity is in the Croatian side of the family, is that I'm like, wow. I've changed before, and I've rewired patterns. And growing up with a psychologist mum who really was great, she was like, "I love you, darling, but I don't really like your behaviour. So how about you go to your room, and when you think you can behave like a decent human being, perhaps you can come out to dinner again." Yeah. And I'd sit there in the room wondering what a decent human being behaved like, not knowing what I'd done, because I was just a little boy teasing my sister. But the fact that I had to consider those things at different times in my life has made me look at my behaviour when I don't feel that I've actually handled something well, and accept responsibility for it, and look at how I might do that better, or how I might just front up to someone and go, "I'm sorry, what I said has truth in it, and I'm not upset I said it, but I am upset about the way I said it to you, and that wasn't fair," And I mean, I had to do that just this week with my wife, and we rarely have moments like that, but I know it's because I'm struggling around some ideas and I'm not giving myself what I need to nurture myself. I'm more likely to not deal with something that well. And I don't blame her, but we're in it together, so it's better that we go through it together, and rather than me kind of pretend it's all okay and then just go and punch a pillow or something.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. And I think, as you said, there's a new level of responsibility. You're entering a new phase in your career and things like that. We've just come off a very difficult year. There are a lot of emotions there that especially in a creative mind like yourself, that you've got to deal with.
Yeah, well, it's nicely said, and I think creative practice, foremost for me, is a self-nurturing thing, and then the next part of nurturing is taking that into the world. But that's a later phase, and it's like it's not selfish. I think it's more like it's self-love sounds funny, but I think it is. It's about it's about self-knowing. Which is related to loving yourself. So in the last couple of years, I've had a caravan in the garden where I go to write. I don't know if I've told you this before, but we live in an old converted church in a little hamlet kind of village called Majors Creek, about 15 minutes from Braidwood. It's a beautiful little spot, a really lovely community that aren't in each other's pockets, but we feel seen, and everyone, celebrates and sunny, but we're really able to do our own thing there. And then we go into the big smoke of Braidwood at the 1,500 capacity as opposed to our 300 village and do the things we need to do, like shop. But when we're there, it's really our little world. And we wander down and look at the waterfall, or go and, for bushwalks, or just play in the garden, or watch Bluey or whatever, But just before Sonny was born in early 2019, Rose was like, "Mike," she knows that creativity is essential to my well-being. She was like, "I think you need a caravan." I'm like, "Why?" She said, "Well, we live in a church, it's mostly one long room, Right. Then there's the bathroom at one end, a separate room, and then there's two little rooms at the opposite end, but they were kind of become baby mum land a little bit, as a sort of little quiet space." And I was like, "Right, so somewhere I can go. You're right." And she is wise, and I'm so happy to be with her, because she doesn't get me what I need. I need to get that myself. She does help that, but she does sometimes alert me to things. I sometimes think I'll just cope with everything and it'll be fine. And it's like, how about we get a few things in place so you can enjoy, rather than hit a breaking point and then go, "I need a place to go."
Exactly.
And funnily enough, that week we went to have lunch with some friends, and there was this beautiful little old vintage caravan in the garden, like covered in branches and moss. And they were like, "I wish someone would take that away. It's just going to rot into the ground." And we were like, I think we can help. And we got like a license for it for a day. We pumped up the tyres, and miraculously they stayed up. And it had been a place where their grandkids had played for years, who are now at the end of their teens, And so they had an attachment to it. They didn't just want to throw it away. So now it's become my play space. And now it's starting to become Sonny's play space. But for the last couple of years, really, there was a period of time, and it doesn't happen every night now, but for a while, it'd be most nights of the week after they went to sleep, I'd go there for a few hours, and the very process of walking through the garden was like walking through into my subconscious, because the night is like this place of mystery and beauty to everyone, but to me, like when you're in the bush particularly, and the stars are out, or the moon, peeing on a tree becomes a sublime experience, the mundane becomes sublime because you're looking at the sky and the clouds, or the shadows of the trees, I'd never before really noticed, before having my caravan ritual, how much darker the shadows are than the night, because in a way the night, there are some nights in the country where it is black, but the longer I'm out there, my eyes start to adjust, and that the shadows of a tree are darker than the black of the ground or the black of the night. And I'm like, that's led to all sorts of interesting things with songwriting about, and me just, having, I could, again, talk for hours on this stuff, but at the end of the day, my little ritual of going out there while Rose and Sonny slept, it was opened up these other creative worlds that I've always been a songwriter who writes a lot, and it's been very much the process of writing's never been a difficult thing for me. There's parts of your career that can be challenging, but that flow happened from young. But as a songwriter, it was really artists like Nick Cave and the artists that we've got coming up that I'm going to play you that I think helped set me on a path as a songwriter. And something about Nick Cave that I love is not about emulating him or trying to be like him, but the fact that he and the songs we've got coming up are Leonard, Cohen and Tom Waits, that those three artists who I listened to a lot around 18, 19, 20, I think gave me a license to be myself because they're such individuals. I can't really compare them to anyone, even though, of course, some of their songs have got very strong relationships to other songs and other artists. They as artists don't really sit in any genres. They're kind of just their own kind of artists who take like bowerbirds from things that they love but then create something that's their own identity made of all these pieces and I think that made me feel okay about doing that myself, and they became some of my pieces that then I constructed my own identity out of that and felt. And you'd be surprised, I don't know if it happens in the literary world, how often people want to know what sort of music you play, why you play it, why your band's called that, all these kind of really tangible questions that to me don't actually matter. It's like, how does it make you feel? That's what it matters to me. Music is a lightning rod to feeling and to deep emotion, whether that's dancing to it and losing your mind in it and just feeling like that, or whether it's actually having an introspective, quiet moment. For me, music allows us to know our real selves that we sometimes have to put to the side to just be active members of society getting on with stuff. And that, whether it's our inner child, whether it's our shadow, whether it's just our self, whatever we want to call it, we need to know that part of ourselves. And I think those three guys of Cave, Waits and Cohen, for me, have always resonated because they're not afraid to be funny. They're not afraid to be kind of almost horrific or traumatizing, not afraid to be tender and beautiful. Sometimes all those things in one song, sometimes not. And I think that's kind of quite brave, But, and I get it when people don't like them. I don't think that we all have to have the same taste. But for me, with a fairly intense home life growing up, there's an intensity in that music that resonated for me.
It's right. I'm sure within the literary world, as human beings, we connect with things. And I mean, I'm a natural history writer, so I don't write, I suppose, stories for people to really connect with. But I do write in a way that I hope people get a better understanding of what I'm writing about, my subject, and why I'm writing it. But music, I think, much more. We connect with different, I suppose, pieces of music at different times in our life, the emotion that we're feeling or the emotion that it makes us feel. It's a personal journey. And
so much of that stuff, I think, that resonates with us, and there's a lot of good thinkers who talk about this, like, I don't know if you know Gabor Mate, who's a doctor and I think psychologist, but an expert in sort of trauma. He's worked a lot in clinics with addicts and things, but all across, and talks about these things. And I heard him talking in a podcast where he said it wasn't until he was 70 that he worked out, and he's in his early 70s now, so this was fairly recently, that things that he was harbouring went back to being abandoned by his mother in the Jewish ghetto when he was 6 months old, because she was worried he was going to be killed. She gave him to other people, and it took him that, nearly almost all of his life to work out his sense of needing to be affirmed by people. He said he's always been a workaholic, always trying to fix things and heal and help people while he wasn't there for his own family. He talks about this and going, I was ignoring them to get other people's affirmation because I felt like I wasn't enough because my mother gave me up. Now, that's beyond his cognitive memory, but he through being a very smart guy who's prepared to go there, eventually unpeeled the layers. And I think a lot of these things where music resonates with us, or anything, nature, various things that can resonate with some deep part of ourselves, goes back to stuff that's a really fundamental, that's before even a memory we can talk about.
Yeah.
And when you think about music, and I didn't think about this until Rose was pregnant and becoming a dad and seeing that whole process, which is, let's face it, it's the most common thing, yet it's still the most incredible.
It is,
And whether you choose to go down that path or not, you've come that path. In almost all cases, other than the occasional test tube baby, and good on you for going that path, because that's another wild adventure.
Yeah.
That being inside your mum, we were hearing before we ever saw or tasted anything. We were hearing the swoosh of things. We were feeling her heartbeat resonating through our whole body. Then eventually, when we were almost cooked and ready to come out, we were hearing music. When people tell me they brought their kid, when they're really pregnant, they've come to a gig, I'm like, I said, it's such an honour that I got to kind of serenade the kid before they came into the world, and that may have a really interesting effect on their lives. Exactly. Who knows? They may never know, but I know it's this potent thing where music is a force beyond, even though we have words and songs, it is also beyond language sometimes, and so it's, exactly. I mean, I feel like every time I start talking about something like this, I could open up whole worlds, so I'll try to drag back into this, but this song I'd love to play here. So we're still now we're going back to my uni days again. Now, I remember there was this really dodgy cassette, dodgy in terms of old and didn't play very well, cassette in our art room at Wollongong Uni. I was painting was my major at that time, and it was a Leonard Cohen's Greatest Hits. I remember putting it on and it wouldn't play properly. It was a bit slow and it intrigued me, but I didn't quite know what it was, because it really, when a cassette's been left and it
starts to stretch a little.
Yeah, but it intrigued me enough that I was at Illawarra Books and Records and I saw this album, Songs of Love and Hate, and I was like, wow, that's a name for an album. At 19, and just bought it for $5 or whatever it was. And I can still remember the moment of, at that point, I was in second year and I was living out near Picton on a farm near Menangle, because I'd had my summer holidays going back to Canberra after my first year, and I came back just thinking I'd be able to find a rental, and I couldn't. I slept on a friend's couch for the better part of a month, and there was just nothing in my price range on Austudy, and no one with a spare room. And then a woman in my painting class had a farmhouse out there. She was a mature age student, younger than me now, probably in her 40s, and I was just like, well, why not? And so for these 6 months, I had this adventure of living out there and driving in every day. And I remember buying that record when I was out there, and her thing was like, oh, Leonard Cohen, suicide music, why would you want to listen to that? And I was like, this has opened these beautiful worlds in me. And I still, when I hear this song, which is a song about difficult emotions, and I think it's one of the few songs that perhaps even captures something about the fact that we end up, without even wanting to, and I'm glad I'm not speaking to myself now, in difficult codependent relationships at times in our lives that are damaging to us, but we don't know how to extricate ourselves. And I think in this song, Avalanche, he speaks of that beautifully, where the power balance is going back and forth, and it's not a happy place, but it is a place that exists, and I am glad that he was prepared to go there and write about this. And I think I can still remember that thing of putting on that record on a record player when I was 19, and imagine that in the start of this song, and these guitar arpeggios and these strings that just really, it's like a landscape for me. I feel it transported me into another physical world.
Wow, amazing.
Glad it can still bring a tear to my eye so many years later.
Wow.
What I'd love to say at this point too is that, being an excitable young man, I was listening to a lot of upbeat music too. What these songs did was they opened a world in me that I think was pre-existent, but I hadn't known how to access it, And I was listening to kind of a lot of unupbeat kind of alternative rock and roll bands like the Ramones and the Cramps and Iggy Pop and the Stooges, and I could do a complete one to you about my kind of rock and roll influences that are, I think, about unleashing something physical within us, But I think why these songs I come back to is that they unleash something that's physical and emotional, and you know, that kind of word spiritual that is so open to interpretation from many different sources, but that I realise is an important part of myself, and I feel of everyone, but I'm also really happy that everyone interprets that in their own way, you know. And for me, I think it comes through music and nature. That's how it always has, you know, and it's some mysterious part of myself that I'll never fully understand, but I know it's there.
And look, I mean, while I'm listening to that music, I'm thinking of what you started talking about, how your dad came to Australia on a, like, you know, after, you know, his parents have passed away, he's in a new country, he's feeling isolated, he's dealing with lots of emotion.
He is,
That's
and
what
it's
I'm
like,
hearing.
and it's that thing too. We use words that are beautiful. He like passed away, and I mean the reality was his dad was taken from their house and shot. You know, when he was 5, and then his mum died of complicated illnesses that they didn't know because they became so poverty stricken after the dad died that she couldn't go see a doctor. So it's that sort of thing where it's this deep trauma that defined his life. You know, and so for me it can't help but define mine. But what I can do is see how he struggled to come to terms with it and did the best he could. And I certainly have always had empathy for him, but I have even more now that I'm a dad, and I could see that he was doing, and he never was physically violent with us, you know, he certainly, and even when he got verbally violent, generally almost never, ever was it at us. Definitely not ever at me. I know he and my older brother clashed when my brother was a older teenager, but he and I certainly have had a few clashes in our lives, but not as many as you'd expect from someone where there was serious anger issues, you know. And I say this with deep love for him, and also great respect that he's become quite a peaceful older man, and he certainly does have a curve that goes up and down a bit of his intensity of emotion, of the down parts, and you know, like it's seasonal with Dad, but it's the seasons aren't quite as harsh as they used to be. You know, winter's not quite as cold and summer's not quite as hot, and that's good. You know? But you know, when I was listening to that song, and I really again was transported to that beautiful old dark little farmhouse in Menangle, in second year uni, and I love pulling back to now and then, you know, because I think the reason I've selected these songs, they were pivotal at a juncture that's led me on my path today that still is true to some degree, you know. And I was making really good friends with this lovely woman at uni called Joanna Franklin. We were in the same writing class, and then and she was also really keen on music, and was probably more advanced than me musically, definitely, you know, and but I can't remember what other things she was studying. We became best of friends, and she needed somewhere to live, and I said, well, why don't you come out and live in the farm too, you know? And Robin was up for that, and so so then I started doing the farm trips with her as well. I mean, it's the trips from farm to uni with her in the second half of that year. So we're still stuck in 1989, I'm afraid, because if I opened up my whole life, we would be here for a month, all right? But we'd have a biography out of it, you know. But you know, he writes books about birds, and then also weirdly one about this artist. But Joe and I just became such good friends, and it was this beautiful thing. But Avalanche really says it all for me, because I did not know that I was stepping into an avalanche, because I had no idea she had a history of serious mental health stuff.
Okay.
That she was only a year older than me, so I was 19, she was 20. But what I later found out, she'd already been for a serious amount of time in a psych ward, you know, and she'd been. I found out later that. And this is no judgment. This is just part of her that at some point in high school, something had flicked, and her mum, who I talked to later, always thought it was hallucinogenic drugs that had stuffed her up, which is a case where I think LSD did shift her mind, and some people can take it for a long time and it doesn't, but for her, I think the pathways of her brain got affected to it. She was still high achieving, lovely, sensitive person, but she developed a really intense paranoia and she became very good at hiding that too. So I knew nothing about this, and we became really good friends. And then we ended up moving into a house together in West Wollongong, in Poulter Street. And so it was just the two of us. So, you know, it was all going to play out in that house, right? It was a 1-bedroom miners cottage. So she had the bedroom, I had the lounge room. So it meant I was so chuffed growing up in Canberra. There were never old fireplaces in old houses, hardly. I mean, there's beautiful kind of brick mid-century houses there, but this was like an old, rickety old place. And I've got a fireplace in my room, a little kind of fold-out couch for a bed. I was like learning to play guitar on her guitars. So she really, even though she didn't influence me necessarily as a songwriter directly in what I wrote, the very fact her guitars were there and I was listening to this music, she was a pivotal part of that. And then we used to jam a lot together. So she's a huge influence on my life. But it's like we were experiencing it together. So we're a huge influence in each other's lives, which was a beautiful thing. And to have that also at that age with a woman, and for it to be non-sexual and to be such a deep friendship, something I forever value. And I've always been able to have great friendships with women, which I'm so happy for in my life. And I feel for guys who don't, and for women who don't have that in men, I feel sad, you know. But and there was a moment which she said, "I really like you, and I want to be together." And I was just, it gobsmacked me because she'd hidden it so well.
Yeah, right.
When she told me, I can still see that night, and I was just like, "Joe, I love you," but it felt like awful. I didn't say I don't feel that way about you. It feels like trotting out a line when I say it now, but at the time I'm like, "You're my friend. I'll go anywhere with you." But that's not a thing, and she dealt with it really well. But I also think, unwittingly, I was starting a spiral of rejection that led to another paranoia thing, that we lived in the house together, and we went from playing music, having fun, and having existential talks all night, and doing all this stuff, to her starting to become more insular, starting to kind of pull her hair, like, in little twirls, till she actually went bald. Like, she had this lovely, long, dark hair. I mean, that was months in the making, but there's a point at which I tried, when I didn't feel I could listen anymore and cope. I wasn't helping. We went to see a psychologist at uni, which she really didn't want to go. And when she was there, she did such a great job of acting like nothing was wrong. This was pre the bald, that it looked like I was freaking out and couldn't cope. And I said, "No, totally, I can't cope. That's true. I'm saying I can't cope." And the psychologist was like, "So, Mike, this is more about you." And I was like, "I'm not trying to say it's not about me at all, but this is and she knew she was lying then, and it was this kind of crucible moment in our relationship. I was like, how can you do this when we've spent so much time being so honest to each other, you know? And but I think her knowing that led to her more self-hate and paranoia about people hating her, and it led to her spiraling and going back into an institution, you know. And so going through all that at 19 while you're at uni is pretty wild. And I'm like my difficult experiences with Dad, I feel thankful for them, for the gift of that, because I think it's helped me to be a more compassionate and empathic person to others and to myself, which is never something I feel that is just sorted. It's something like fitness. You have to maintain it. You maintain your mental health, and it can go astray, you know.
Oh, definitely.
But Joe was a really good sign to me of someone who I felt was so close to me, and we were so similar, but that it was almost like I said, my brother had the big drugs path, and fortunately came out the other side of it. She had the serious mental health path that I could almost see that. I can see that. I could go there. You know, I know how she's feeling. I know all these things. They seem fake, but if you start thinking about it and you want to think about conspiracies and government, all that stuff, it's all bloody happening, you know. I just don't bother worrying about it because there's nothing I can do about it. Of course, they don't all have our best interests at heart, and of course, there are Machiavellian forces between the mass media and governments doing bad crap. But you know what? I'm not going to create a safe house where everyone can go. I'm just going to try to be nice to people around me, you know. And I think it's that thing of her trying to save herself by becoming a sort of I will change this. I'll fight the evil sort of thing. I mean, there's one point not long before. It was one of the last times I saw her before she died, and she was telling me something, and I was like, "I know," and she went, "You know?" And I was like, "Of course I do. Anyone who cares knows that there are people who are not compassionate, empathic beings, and that's why that's why mass murders happen, why genocide happens, all these things. It's a product of part of humanity, you know, that if you don't nurture part of yourself, you can go down another path." And she really tried to change her whole identity. At a certain point, I hadn't seen her for a year or so, and I was. So I'm going to jump ahead. This is over about a kind of 8-10 year period, and so we always had a friendship. Like, I think a lot of her friendships broke off because she became difficult, and when she came out of an institution, she would try to make a new life, and I'd always be like, I'd find where she was and have a cup of tea with her and laugh and listen to music and play music, and so I think she always loved the fact that I didn't give up on her. But she also had so much shame about what she'd gone through and the things she'd done, you know. And the thing that finally tipped her for the last time was that she was we were both in our late 20s, and I was in Melbourne running a venue with my family, which is another great story we won't go into, but it was a great time and a hard time, but it was a beautiful place. And she inherited some money. Her grandmother died, and she was like, "Now I'm going to create a recording studio and make all this stuff," and all the stuff she'd been wanting to do, because she was a really creative artist but hadn't been able to quite manifest it, manifest it to share. She still made stuff. And it was almost like that was too much for her to deal with, you know, and that she, I won't go too much in the story, but she got to a point of where she just tried to cut off from everybody and changed her name, moved to Sydney. But then, you know, all the money got lost in various ways. But she ended up living on the street. And the next thing I found out was that that she was dead, and detectives wanted to talk to me about anything I might know about her past. So they were trying to piece together why she'd been killed, and it was on they thought she was probably living on the street. She was on a mattress, you know, there, and her head had been kicked in. It was not nice, you know, and it was they never found out who did it, you know, and it was one of these strange things. But
and how much later was this? Sorry,
this was in the late 90s. Okay. So this is, and I met her in the late 80s. So she was still she would only been pushing 30, you know. So she'd gone through a lot of hard stuff in that period of time, including living overseas and being incarcerated there, but also having good times, you know. So she'd get her stuff together. That was the incredible thing. She was a very capable person, but then these threads would come back in, you know. And but I always felt, as sad as it was, that there was also something that releasing her from life, like life was so hard, you know, and I'm not trying to say it was any sort of justice or a beautiful thing to happen, and the most likely case was just it was another street person didn't even mean to kill her, you know, that it was someone just went in the kick, you know, but it's of course it's a tragedy. But I also feel that the rest of her life would have been such a big tragedy continuing, and I feel so lucky to have known her, you know, and I guess it brings me to this next song, which is this Tom Waits song that is called "Innocent When You Dream." It's a beautiful, beautiful lullaby, really. But it took me years to realise it's about going mad.
Yeah, right.
Because I didn't, when I was young and used to listen to it, I didn't know bats are in the belfry meant you're crazy.
Yeah, right.
And the first line is, the bats are in the belfry, the dew is on the moor, where are the arms that held me and pledged to love before. And it's a beautiful song really about lost love. I feel like Jo is a lost love. It wasn't a romantic love, but it was just as deep. It was she was my first love, but it was in so many ways, you know. We can talk about this song more after we hear it. The other things it unlocks, but
definitely.
Thanks for letting me go there. That's not stuff I talk about all the time. So,
it's beautiful to listen to, and I can see it's a very important part of you.
And
your past.
It is, and I wouldn't say that I live for my friends who have died, but certainly I embrace life because I know it's fragile. That album, that's the last song on the album called Frank's Wild Years. And again, thanks to Illawarra Books and Records, I remember buying that there. And a friend in my painting class had given me a cassette of some of his stuff, which was more the 70s, kind of more jazz blues soak stuff, which is great too. But when I heard this, it unlocked something in me that the album's incredibly diverse. But some of these songs, whether it's the lullabies or some of the more rambunctious ones with accordions and kind of strange percussion, really tapped into some Europeanness in me. Like that feels like it's an old European folk song to me, you know, that the melodies, it could be English as well, but I see that as part of Europe. Call me strange. In the Brexit era. But it tapped into some part of me that it felt like songs that my ancestors have sung, you know, whether it's ancestors in England or ancestors in Croatia. And I think the accordions and pump organs and violins and those sort of instruments, you know, for many years I've had a band called the Black Sea Gentlemen. That's all that instrumentation, you know, and I think Tom Waits helped unlock that stuff that musically in me a bit as well as emotionally, because let's face it, you know, I mean, now you can hear more bands with alternate instrumentation at folk festivals, but in the 80s it was more like it'd be a rock lineup, or it'd be synths, or it'd be this and that, but you really weren't hearing many bands that would have a piano accordion or a violin or clarinet. Really, you know, it was almost like rediscovering an old world that had been the world. A lot of people listen to the music, and when he talks about in the chorus, you know, it's memories that I'm stealing. I feel like, you know, in some ways songwriting is stealing into memory and finding things and taking them back to now, and seeing how they sit in this world. Are they vivid, or do they dissipate, or do they fall apart or stand up? It's an interesting process, you know. But I actually literally learned to play guitar playing along with this album on one of Jo's guitars, you know. And she had a steel string guitar and a nylon string guitar, and I just found the nylon one to be much nicer on my fingers. And a lot of guitarists who learnt from kids learn on nylon, so they always wanted to graduate to steel or electric. And I've always been a nylon player because I came to it as a young man, and I was like, this is how I learnt, and my playing style developed around that. And very happy to say there were a lot of songs in this album on A minor, which was very easy for a beginner
Oh,
guitarist.
okay. And were you playing instruments before this? I know, like...
Yeah. Well, in school band, I learned clarinet, and other than the first day, I vividly remember in year 4 really enjoying learning some notes on the clarinet. Really, school band wasn't for me. I think because, as I mentioned earlier, Mum had already helped us open up our big creative worlds, and there was nothing creative about being in school band. And
exactly.
And then I got private sax lessons for a while. Sax, it was the 80s, let's face it. And again, I learnt with this old Czech teacher, and he was probably a lovely guy, but I could tell he was bored, stupid. He'd just sit there smoking cigarettes, leaving them in the ashtray, and then it would curl up into my face, and we'd try not to. I eventually did get to the point where I was good enough on it that he invited me to play with a little band he put together. I remember my crowning glory on the sax was playing The Entertainer for a live concert with him on piano, and he really... but it was just when I kind of got to a point where maybe I could get okay at it, I realised I didn't really care about it. And and I think simultaneously, my elder brother, who's 3.5 years older than me, was playing in bands, and I about 14, I started going to see live bands, and that was so much more visceral to me.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was pre the cheap flights era, so all bands from Sydney or Melbourne would do gigs in Canberra on their way. Doing Sydney to Sydney to Melbourne one day is kind of impossible to do a gig and do that whole drive. So I'd be able to go to see often 3 to 4 bands a week, from the age of, and no one seemed to check ID back then. I didn't even ever have a fake ID. And I didn't try to drink. I was literally there for the music. I remember maybe one experience of being pissed at one of my brother's gigs, which didn't turn out well because I got punched out by a skinhead by being too friendly to him and patting his head. Because I thought he was one of my brother's mates. I asked for it, really. But mostly I was really sober and really getting into the music and seeing Canberra bands as well. But the 80s was an incredible era for underground live music in Australia. And that was a huge influence on me. But I think going to see that, I was like, oh, music can be so much more exciting. And then going to see my brother's bands, he then invited... I started playing a bit with kids at school and singing in bands at Hawker College. But there wasn't... we did some weird lunchtime concerts with somewhere between performance art and rock and roll because we were into weird modernist performance art and Dadaism and all this stuff. So we just brought it all together. We're like, well, we love Iggy Pop and the Stooges, but we also love the Dadaists, and so we just put it all in together, And which my first band ended up kind of, you could almost explain it as somewhere between absurdism and funk and rock, But before I'd formed that band in '89, I was doing various things at school, but then my brother asked me if I'd like to sing in his band. And I said to him recently, why did you ask me to sing in your band? I was like, I was 16, I was like, you were... I mean, the singer of the band, we called him the old man because he was 26, but they all seemed so much older than me because they were all in their early 20s, and Vic was probably about 20, And he'd introduced me to a lot of kind of alternative Australian music, particularly bands like Radio Birdman. I don't know if you know them. And so I was, again, energy of a young guy. That was the energetic music I loved then before I'd discovered Nick Cave or Tom Waits and Leonard Cohen. So the band that he had at the time, he had various iterations. He had a band called Kill City that were very Birdman influenced. And their singer was going to leave the band. And he asked me if I'd like to sing for them. And I was like, Vic, why did you ask me? He said, I'd see you at gigs and you were ready to go. Everyone knew, I'd see you get up on stage with bands from Sydney and sing. Like, they'd just see you in the audience getting into it. I had really long hair and I'd dress up for the gigs and paisley shirts and cool pants and, get into, I kind of loved kind of 60s rock and roll and garage punk. And so and there were bands, literally, they'd see me singing along. I remember this band from Sydney, the Psychotic Turnbuckles, who I loved. And they all had like long green or purple wigs and psychedelic clothes and played like kind of heavy rock with a kind of 60s psychedelic edge. And this guy just invited me up. And then he left the stage and let me sing the song. And he had a break and got a breather. And I was like, I didn't realise how weird that was then, that doesn't really happen very often. It's more like something out of a movie, And the next time I saw them, my brother was like, hey man, Jesse, come over. This is my brother who sang with you. He's cool. And it's his birthday. Do you want to sing a song? I'm like, Vic, I don't have to. And it's that lovely thing of Vic just seeing in me what I hadn't yet seen. Vic was a great guitar player, but he wasn't a front man, and he could see in me that I had that front man thing of no fear once I'm there, that the stage felt like a comfortable place to be, And they were like, cool, what song you want to sing? And all their songs were about surfing or rock and roll wrestling. That was their theme, which is exactly what you want when you're that old and haven't done either. And I was like, yeah, Albuquerque. And so then, they start their set with that song. They're like, well, invite our friend up, Michael. And I was just like, no wonder I ended up in music, And then I ended up singing for Vic's band, and which was a short-lived thing because they split up shortly after. But it gave me a taste of doing a full show on stage in a big, a rock venue, the big stage, the dark room, and the lights, and just the feeling of the music, the energy. I still vividly remember that feeling. Yeah. And I also do remember afterwards, because I was quite a tall young guy and the long hair and everything, some woman talking to me, and it took me years to realise she might have been just trying to strike up a conversation to see if we might have chemistry or whatever. And I was 16 and I was just vibrantly just off stage. I had no idea what it was like being chatted up. I just wondered why this woman was talking to me. Yeah. Because I didn't know her. Needless to say, it didn't go anywhere. Yeah, I was going to say. Me not being a very active participant there. And I think it's important to talk about this stuff too, because I don't want you to think that I'm just a sad sack who sat in my room. Like I've always been into the energetic exchange of life. But coming back to these songs now is, I guess, important to me too, because as you mentioned before we started chatting on the recording, becoming a dad, I've now really relaunched a solo career under my own name, and it's making me look at the stuff that. And not even look at it, it's come back up to me of what I've always loved that maybe I hadn't put first in my career as a musician. And and this is not to degrade any of the things I've done. I'm proud of them and I love the bands that I've been in or that I have now, like the Black Sea Gentlemen for the last 20 years.
20 years, that's right.
Yeah. But I realised that there was a vulnerability that I was not allowing, that I've always written songs like the ones I'm writing now. I feel I've got a slightly new perspective because I'm a dad, but I do feel what the new perspective, moreover, has been to go, you know what, I'm fronting up with these vulnerable songs. Yeah.
And you're writing more for yourself now, like, as your journey rather than writing for the band as the band's journey, maybe.
No, that's a great point, but I think I was always writing for my journey. This is just, I think it's just, I'd always perhaps, because there is a showman in me, that I just talked about it arriving on that stage gig. I think that sometimes the showman has led the show a bit, and even though there's been, the Black Sea Gentlemen have songs that have nuance and vulnerability and beauty in it, but it's through a mythical lens, So in a way, the character of Mikelangelo I step into is an alter ego for me that is part of me. But it's an alter ego that makes me almost bulletproof. It's my Superman. Like, anything could go wrong on stage, anyone could yell anything, and I can deal with it. Like, so it's not fake. It's real. And it was something I needed at that time, particularly when I started the band. I'd come out of a very hard time of running the venue with the family, and I was really quite broken. And in a way, I was able to do these songs with the band by stepping into the Superman version of myself, where, sure, it wasn't like he had no problem, but it wasn't like he laughed at them. It's almost like, and now I guess I'm like, I like having that suit in the cupboard, and it's good to do that because the unapologetic nature of Mikelangelo and the kind of holy fool where I can almost be like very serious and then laugh at myself and the world in all its joy and horror on stage is a good thing for me and the audience. But also, I'm not writing songs in that vein. I'm writing songs in other veins. So it may be that I write more songs for the Black Sea Gentlemen. Who knows? We're still a thing. But the tide of where the songs are going, there are a lot of ballads, there are a lot of rock songs, but the rock songs within that have an emotional core that is where I am now. And I guess the way I see it as an artist is it's not to think that anything I did in the past was shallow. There's always a depth to it, but that you're going further down that into those caves and finding new things within, A lot of people use this sort of thing of, always seeking the light and looking for the big expanse. And I love the light in the big expanse. But to be honest, if I had to look at the sky for too long, my eyes start watering. But I think there's, various good things like Jung and stuff talk about it, but there's this idea of that your shadow is actually the place if you confront those things that are the most shameful or fearful or awful or ugly in yourself, then in fact you're coming to terms with this. It's coming full circle of what we were talking about earlier. That's where creativity and acceptance lies. It doesn't lie in running away from that stuff.
Yeah.
And if that means you do that and then decide to make really upbeat, fizzy dance music, that's also fine. Yeah. Doesn't mean the music has to carry that or whatever you do. But I think all of us, to live our lives fully, you need to go there, and you need to do it in your own way. And my way has been through music, and I suppose it's just to go, I'm ready to say it's okay to be Michael Simic on stage. It's still slightly weird for me to see my name on posters. I'm used to seeing Mikelangelo, And I'm kind of glad that it's the 20th anniversary of the Black Sea Gentlemen this year, and I'm still doing those shows. At first, part of my transformational nature wants it to be a break where I'm moving on, and then I'm like, you know what? People have backed me and believed in this and love this, and I'll want to go see a band do the songs I love of theirs too. I get that, so I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too. It remains to be seen whether that can be done. But I certainly have to try and to go, okay, for everyone who loves the Black Sea Gentlemen, it still exists and it's a beautiful thing. And but I also do this thing, not even but, and I also do this thing. If you want to come along there, great. And if you don't want to, that's fine. Other people can come on that journey, you know. And I'm actually spending 3 days in the studio next week. I've been recording in a studio near Crookwell, about an hour from 40 minutes from Goulburn. Great studio in the country, Old Binder Road. And finishing that and then releasing it this year will be really the beginning of some other journey, which is really nice. But I put out an album under the Mikelangelo moniker, like in 2014, called City of Dreams, when I was living in Melbourne, and had some great collaborators on that, really great collaborators, St. Clair and Miles Brown, all these great Melbourne artists. But ostensibly, I think that was a solo album. You know, it was in that it wasn't a Black Sea Gentlemen album. I had another band, the Tin Star. I've had lots of bands. It really was, even though I did some co-writes on it, I think the place it was coming from was what I'm talking about of going into some personal emotional depth in a more singer-songwriter way, I guess, rather than in a band way. You know?
And so where are we at with your musical journey now? What's your next song going to be?
Well, I felt I really wanted to take you into artists female artists that have been a big influence on me, and Nina Simone has been an artist that is just I always come back to, and maybe because I've talked a lot, we'll just play the song rather than talking a lot. But funnily enough, you know, I did discover her during my Wollongong days too. So maybe it's because you asked me to do this and we're in Kiama. You know, that I remember being at Wollongong Uni, and there was this great artist in residence from Holland called Jose Ertz, an amazing kind of visual artist and performance artist. And she was one of the people I learnt a lot from there. She was so great, and she'd make these great slideshows of installations she'd made in nature. She'd create these things out of fabric, you know, that almost like cocoons and things, but then put them in these incredible natural environments, and then have beautiful music. And you'd watch the slideshow because clearly you're not going to take people there, you know. And I remember watching one and being blown away by these beautiful visuals and by the music, and I was like, this guy has got an amazing voice and a really good piano player. And then I found out afterwards when I asked her, she said, "You don't know Nina Simone?" And I was like, "No." She said, "Well, it's a woman and she's playing piano as well." And I was like, "Right, well, I was completely wrong, wasn't I?" And so from recollection, I think this was the first song of hers I heard, and it's certainly stayed one that I've loved. And one thing I love about Nina Simone is she writes amazing songs, but she also is one of those great interpreters where she takes an existing song and it becomes her own. And this is a song that was written for Johnny Mathis and was later covered by Bowie after Nina Simone, but for hers is always the pivotal one for me. There's no other versions for me. And this is also, some of her best recordings for me are live. This is a live version. You wouldn't know it because there isn't a big roar of the crowd, but it's the fact that she found these moments in the live situation where she tapped into this incredible, intimate, emotional state. So this is Wild as the Wind by Nina Simone.
Such great vocals in that, isn't
She's
she?
amazing.
She's incredible.
It's blowing my mind that she's doing this incredible piano playing and holding this long, straight note over the top of it. That's what I love, that she's not doing a whole, you know, blah, 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 blah. She's just going, she's got, it's like her voice is like architecture or mountains or something, you know? It really, I can't compare her to anyone. And what I love too is if you get one of her albums, they're not all like that too. One will be like an African folk song, and one will be like a kind of a version of a Beatles song, you know. She'll mix it up. She just finds the synergies of where, when people think of her as a jazz pianist, I'm like, that's just part of her thing, you know. She was always going to have a rough road because she was unclassifiable. And a black woman in mid-20th century America trying to have a career. I mean, geez.
And I think I'm right. She started as a classical pianist, basically.
That's
and then
right,
she was playing, and the club manager said, "You've got to sing tonight." And that was it.
And I think she was always a bit broken-hearted because I think she was really really heralded as a child prodigy in the classical world, and then And I've seen the doco about her on Netflix, which I highly recommend. It's incredible. I learned a lot, but I can't remember exactly what happened, Peter. But I'm pretty sure she didn't get into the music school like Juilliard or whatever that she wanted to. They were just like, sorry, you know. And I think she'd pegged everything on it. Like this, I am the prodigy classical pianist, and she literally started doing those club gigs, like you said. You're right. Where she started playing, they were, well, you're going to have to sing as well. And so she just started doing. Maybe that's almost what led to her style. She did whatever songs she could to live playing, you know, for 4 hours a night in a little dive bar to make the rent. So that's a big drop from I'm going to be the classical pianist prodigy. But the beautiful gift of what that gave us was the fact that she had to engage with popular song and bring her fine art aesthetic to songs that are made of the earth. And I'm like, it's that tension that's exciting, you know?
Exactly. That's right.
And, you know, I think everything that she's experienced in her huge life comes through in the way she sings. And what I love about that song is that, you know, something that could be a trite song, you know? It could be about, you know, you kiss me with your kiss my life begins, you know? That could be delivered and just be annoying, but she's really putting the reality into those lyrics of, you're not going to feel like that with every kiss, but there is going to be 1 or 2 kisses in your life that feel like that. And I love that she's captured that moment in there. There's even a moment where she goes, you're everything to me, and then she kind of goes, It's almost like she's remembering going, well, you're not anymore. You know, it's like she's got a little internal dialogue in her head. I'm like, this is really interesting, you know. And but I love the fact it's got this deep, unapologetic emotion, and of like, it feels like the first time of being touched and being about to have sex with someone, and that's a huge thing, and not many songs capture that beyond. Well, I mean, it's great having a teenage moment capturing that, but this is a moment that is actually full of something so potent, you know. And I was just thinking then about when Rose and I first kissed, and she's my wife, well, I'm her husband now. We'd been doing a project together in the Snowy Mountains for a few years. I was based in Melbourne. My band, the Black Sea Gentlemen, had been engaged to research stories of migrants working on the Snowy scheme. So we talked to all these all workers on the Snowy scheme. So a lot of people in the 80s and 90s who were either Australian or Europeans who telling us their stories from that era. And because my dad had come out and worked there, but always been tight-lipped and never told me the stories because he had a rough time in Australia in his early years. It felt like I got to know myself and my father better through talking to all these people I didn't know. But Rose was the producer of that project for this company, Big Art. And so we worked together in tandem for 2.5 years and became close as colleagues and got on really well. But then literally when the project was just about to end, we would like walking under the moonlight on the Monero Plains, and it was like, I swear, it was like the moon said, kiss her. It was like, who knows if our paths had just left at that point, whether if we hadn't grasped that moment. And I was in a relationship, we never made anything, because I was in a relationship that was on the rocks, and she and I knew it. And we were collaborators, St. Clair and I. Like, I have so much love and respect for her and her work and what she does. And I'm so glad for the 7 years we had together. But we had a rougher time than we expected. We thought it was going to be our great romance of our lives. And in some ways it was, but it was also our great reckoning. And I mean, this conversation, interestingly, has ended up circulating around trauma and around childhood and around what makes us, you know. And I think both of us somehow helped each other bring that stuff out into the open. She'd had some really heavy stuff happen in her childhood that she has to deal with, you know, and does deal with well, but a lot of that becomes a holding pattern of coping. But in some ways, I never meant to make it hard on her, and nor she on me, but perhaps the very fact that we collaborated together and sang together and performed and sung songs about our love journey, which had been a hard one, opened those doors. And we really, we were just like, can't we just have fun together, you know, which we did. We had some really fun times, but when I realised that it had been over for a while, but neither of us could leave it. You know, we'd been sleeping in separate beds, unmarried for a few years. We couldn't let go of the thing we'd made together, both with our music, and then we made a beautiful album, that City of Dreams album, together. And it was our livelihood too. We were living from doing these gigs, and it was tough to let go of all that stuff where we'd left our lives to make these dreams happen, and we didn't want to acknowledge that it hadn't happened, but it just hadn't happened the way we'd expected it was gonna. So, you know, that Wild as the Wind, that could be about Rose, it could be about any of my pivotal relationships, and I don't mean that to degrade any of them, you know. Rose is my life partner. It's so good to know that we can deal with things together, you know, that we can, that with the hard things, we're always there to listen, not to bring each other down. And I don't think anyone ever means to do that. It's just whatever difficult stuff we have in our lives, sometimes we can't do it. And but that, I'm so happy that the moon asked me to kiss Rose at that moment. And I didn't even think we were going to be together. I was like, no, that's it. That's only going to be that. I've got to make the other relationship work. It's like we're wired with this puritanical idea that you commit to something, you've got to make it work. And of course, that's a good idea, but it really doesn't always work.
Exactly.
And it's interesting now, because we're talking, I'd love to keep going deep, but it's like people are setting up a markets around us, they're plugging in power, there's food stalls, and I feel that we've come full circle, and I feel I could talk a lot more about this stuff, but I feel we've covered a lot of terrain. We'll just go out with another song, and
that'd be beautiful.
There was obviously a lot of contenders when it's 5 songs. You have to make the decisions quickly, otherwise you're stuffed. And I was really close to wanting to put in Elvis's "Love Me Tender" because I love Elvis, and you know, let's do a podcast about him and why he's an interesting and troubled cultural figure, and why he's so interesting, and not just his talent. It's because he holds so much within him of the failure of Western civilization, you know, and that's not going too big, but that's another story. But I decided not, and why I love Me Tender, because it's one of the very few songs he co-wrote. He mostly sung songs people gave to him, and it is based on an old American Civil War song. It's probably based on a song before that, but what I love is that it's our ultimate gentleness, a man allowing himself to be gentle and caring within a song unapologetically. It never even has a big dramatic rise. It stays on this gentle, tender tone. But you all know that song, so you can go listen to that when you want. But in the end, I decided to go with this because this woman had a powerful effect on me, and I still love her stuff. Françoise Hardy, she's a French singer and songwriter who's still alive. She's in her 70s now, still releasing albums. Became a very successful, almost ingenue at 18, huge with her own original songs in France, and then became in the 60s very big around the world, and heralded by, you'd see photos of her hanging out with Mick Jagger and with all the big rock stars at the time. She was very beloved and still is, even though not everyone necessarily today knows her. But I remember Canberra for years, I don't know if they still had this trash and treasure markets out in this suburb called Jamison. And we used to go there as kids. I used to go there into my early teens. And one time, in my late teens, I bought a box of albums for I recall it being $1. It might have been more, but I think it was $1. And it was like 100 albums at least in there. And I kind of looked through it, and I didn't even know what I was going to find. I just decided it looked interesting. And then I remember going through it at home, and there's 4 albums in there that became pivotal to me. And one was a beautiful Dean Martin album called The Lush Years, which was really good songs, really beautifully delivered, and helped kind of me understand where a crooner can be a really great thing. One was Bombora by the Atlantics, which is like instrumental surf rock by, again, young Greek Australian migrants. And you know, that song, of course, was a massive international hit for them in the early 60s, and I loved that album. And one was a Chris Christopherson album that was his first album, but always reads like a greatest hits to me, because I think he'd amassed those songs. And and it's got a great thing about him written on the back by Johnny Cash, who met him when he was. Chris Christopherson was literally a cleaner in the Columbia recording studios, and gave his demos to Johnny Cash, and Johnny Cash was like, "You got to record this guy." So I'm not even going to start on Johnny Cash. He's a massive influence. You all know him. You can go find his stuff. But that album, but the other album that was in there was these 4 albums. Was this Françoise Hardy's greatest hits, and I didn't know who it was. I was just like, I put it on and was interested, and these great French pop songs. And I think one thing I loved about it is not knowing what she was singing. That I could get the mood and the longing and the poetry of it without actually knowing the words. And there's been times in which I've looked up the words of this song, and I've realised I don't need to know them. Actually, I kind of have the drift of it, and it's called Mon ami la rose, so I know it is my friend the rose. I did enough basic French at school, but I don't know enough about what it is, and that is what keeps me mysteriously drawn back to this song, is that I can overlay that with my own story. And I think that's where I've always loved music and bands from around the world, where I understand what they're saying even though I don't know the words. And so I thought I'd include her to just touch on that idea. And perhaps that resonates with me, having a Croatian father who I don't understand Croatian, but I understand him, you know. And in the Black Sea Gentleman, I speak in a Croatian accent. I use my father's accent, and while that might just seem as a joke, it is funny. It's true, but it is resonant to me too, because it was a few years into that band in the early noughties that had developed, and our alter egos developed on stage. It wasn't a plan. They came out naturally. It was a natural part of it. Emerged from the music and things, and then I realised I had to keep the accent, not do a bit of it and a bit of my Australian. And then it dawned on me that as kids, at least me and my sister, I don't remember my brother, though he may have, used to talk to Dad in his accent. We'd go, "Hey, Vinko, come over here. What's wrong with you?" And we would speak to him like it was our familiar way. Seeing we didn't speak Croatian, he was our dad. We loved him. We were close to him. Yep. So why wouldn't you speak like him? I mean, if I love my dad more than that kid at school who speaks an Australian accent, so why don't I speak in a Croatian accent? True. And so maybe that's what also drew me into songs that had accents or different language. And I love listening to Francoise idea when she sings her songs in English, because she does all the hits in English as well. They obviously did it to get the English market, but I love it that she can't pronounce her R's and all these things. I'm so glad you're not singing these in a perfect English accent, you know? Or you even think of a band like ABBA. People talk about how great the songwriters were, and yes, they were, but if you hear other singers sing them, the songs can become trite. But you hear those two women sing it, and there's a melancholy and a depth in there. Even in Dancing Queen, the way they sing together, there's some beauty in there, and it's in the accent. There's something that's slightly foreign that is attractive to me, and that might not be true to everyone, but that's a little behind my personal story of why these sorts of songs can resonate for me. So I look forward I think we should do a whole podcast series.
I think we should, Michael. I think it's been so fantastic. As I say, all this action happening around here, but I haven't noticed any of it. I've just been absolutely in tune with your journey. It's just been
thanks for letting
emotional.
me share it. Maybe it's the fact that we spent so many hours talking on the plane that one time, and since then we've had maybe occasional little chat on on Messenger or whatever, or bumped into at Illawarra Folk Festival. But we know how to talk.
We do.
And I know I've talked a bit more.
But that's what it's all about, though.
Well, you know, I think all of us have our own song lines. We have our own story, and I think part of the joy of sharing my story is not just about me. It's hoping that you feel like you will feel okay to tell your story. And if you hear this podcast and you meet me in the street or see me at a gig, feel free to tell me your story or send me a message, because I think all of us are of value, and no one's story is actually more interesting than anyone else. No one is. But it's us fronting up and accepting that our story matters. You know.
Yeah, definitely, exactly right. Well, we better listen to this last song, then,
Let's
Michael.
do it.